The registration card stayed in Officer Nolan Pierce's hand for less than a second. He looked at the name, then at Camille Foster. Then he dropped the card, her license, and the insurance certificate onto the Aston Martin's passenger seat. He did not look toward the rear of the car. That was the first thing Camille noticed. Pierce had stopped her on Easton Parkway beneath a row of low commercial signs and winter-bare trees. His cruiser sat several yards behind the Aston Martin, emergency lights flashing against the rear glass. Traffic moved around them through the left lane. According to the reason he had given dispatch, the rear plate had been difficult to read. The plate was clean. Pierce had not walked behind the vehicle to inspect it. His attention remained inside, more specifically, on the fitted black trim around the center display. Engine off. Camille pressed the start button. Step out. She left both hands visible on the steering wheel. What needs to be checked? Pierce shifted his weight closer to the open window. I gave you an instruction. I heard it. Her voice stayed level. She opened the door and stepped onto the shoulder. Pierce pointed toward a faded yellow maintenance stripe running beside the curb. Stand there. Keep your hands where I can see them. Camille moved to the stripe. A city bus passed slowly enough for 3 passengers to glance through the windows. At the pharmacy driveway across the street, a man loading a paper grocery bag into the back of a sedan stopped for a moment. He looked toward the patrol car, then finished closing his trunk. Pierce picked up Camille's registration again. This vehicle registered to you? Her name was printed directly beneath the ownership line. Yes. Mater. How long have you had it? Long enough for the registration to be current. Pierce looked at her over the roof. What do you do? Camille let the questions sit for a beat. What does my occupation clarify about the plate? His mouth tightened slightly. I'm trying to determine what I'm dealing with. She looked toward the passenger seat. You already have my license, insurance, and registration. He tossed the registration back down. You like answering questions with questions. No. I prefer knowing what a question is being used to establish. Pierce reached for the radio clipped near his shoulder. Dispatch. Driver is being evasive and unusually focused on procedure. Possible concealment issue involving vehicle electronics. Camille watched his thumb leave the radio button. There had been no mention of vehicle electronics before that transmission. No warning light. No scanner. No visible device. No open compartment. Pierce opened the driver's door wider. Camille stayed on the yellow stripe. I won't consent to a search of the vehicle. He glanced toward her. This is an officer safety inspection. What is the safety issue? Stand where I put you. He leaned inside. Camille stopped speaking. Pierce ignored the door pockets. He did not open the glove compartment. He did not examine the storage space behind the seats or the small compartment beneath the center armrest. His right hand went directly to the lower edge of the center display. He pressed the trim. Nothing moved. Then he ran his thumb beneath a narrow seam on the right side. Again, nothing. Camille watched his fingertips instead of his face. First the bottom edge, then the right seam, then the lower corner where the trim met the console. There was an order to it. He pressed harder. The panel flexed, but stayed seated. Pierce leaned farther into the cabin. The fitted trim had no visible latch from where he had first stood, outside the car. Camille looked at the unopened glove compartment, the untouched storage pockets, then back at his hand. You didn't bring a trim tool. Pierce straightened. What? You expected that panel to release by hand. He stared at her. Camille remained inside the yellow stripe. You haven't checked any other section of the car. I know how to conduct an inspection. I didn't say you didn't. Then stop narrating what I'm doing. She looked at the center console. You started with one location. Pierce closed the distance between them by a step. It was not enough to force her backward. It was enough to make the yellow stripe feel narrower. What are you suggesting? Camille considered the question. The Aston Martin's registration still lay unread on the passenger seat. His stated reason for the stop remained behind the car, where he had never gone. She answered carefully. I'm asking why you knew where to put your hand. Pierce's jaw shifted. For the first time, he looked away from her before answering. I observed signs of modification. From outside? Yes. Through closed trim? His hand moved toward the radio again. Camille said nothing else. Pierce pressed the button. Sergeant Kessler, I need you on Easton Parkway. High-value vehicle, possible unauthorized electronic modification. The reply came quickly. A calm male voice filled the space between the cruiser and the Aston Martin. Is the lower panel open? Pierce did not answer immediately. His eyes moved from the radio to Camille. She looked past him toward the center display. The lower panel was still closed. Sergeant Paul Kessler had not arrived. He had not seen the vehicle. Pierce pressed the radio. No, Sergeant. Leave it in place until technical support gets there. The transmission ended. Pierce lowered his hand. Camille stayed exactly where he had ordered her to stand. The faded yellow stripe ran beneath both of her shoes. A minute earlier, it had been the place Pierce chose to keep her while he inspected the car. Now it marked the place where she had heard a second man identify the same hidden panel without ever seeing it. Sergeant Paul Kessler walked past the rear plate without looking at it. He came up the passenger side of the Aston Martin, glanced through the open driver's door, then stopped beside Nolan Pierce. Leave that section alone until Nash gets here. He pointed toward the center display, not the plate. Camille stayed on the shoulder while traffic moved past Easton Parkway. Pierce had shifted her a few feet away from the yellow stripe so Kessler could stand between her and the car. Kessler was older than Pierce, with close-cut gray at his temples and a uniform that sat neatly on him. His body camera faced forward, his voice never rose. License and registration? Pierce nodded toward the passenger seat. Everything matches on the face of it. Kessler picked up the documents. He spent longer on them than Pierce had. Insurance current? Yes, Camille said. Registered address current? Yes. Any recent transfer of ownership? No. Kessler looked down at the registration again. We're going to independently verify all of this. Camille watched him place the papers against the roof of the cruiser. Are you independently verifying the electronics concerned too? Kessler looked at her. That came from an officer observation. So did the plate issue. His expression changed only around the mouth. Those are separate matters now. He walked to the driver's side of his cruiser. Pierce stayed near the Aston Martin. Camille did not continue. That was enough. Kessler had required additional confirmation for a state registration card, an active insurance document, and a driver's license that all agreed with one another. Pierce's description required none. The cruiser door closed. Through the windshield, Camille could see Kessler working at the mounted terminal. His hand moved between the keyboard and a small notepad on the console. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Pierce glanced over. You can check it. Camille removed the phone. The first notification came from the State Motor Vehicle portal. Registration status review initiated. She opened it. The request had been created moments earlier. After Pierce had entered the car, she took a screenshot. Another vibration. Her insurer's application showed a verification request tied to a municipal inquiry. Policy status. Active external verification pending. Camille saved that screen too. The third notice came by email. Fairwick Municipal Financial Integrity Review. Vehicle identifier attached. Temporary administrative hold pending review. She looked at the creation line. Later than the first search. Later than Pierce's radio statement about concealment. Later than Kessler's question about the lower panel. The alerts had not led them to the car. The car had led them to the alerts. Kessler stepped out of the cruiser. We have a municipal technical alert associated with the vehicle. Camille put the phone back in her pocket. When was it created? System entries don't always finalize in field order. I asked when this one was created. Kessler held out her registration. We're working through it. She took the card. No argument. The timestamp was already stored. A county sheriff's vehicle pulled in behind Kessler's cruiser several minutes later. The deputy who stepped out was a black woman in her late 40s with a spiral notebook already in one hand. Her nameplate read Benson. Kessler met her halfway down the shoulder. Claire, appreciate you coming. What's the request? Independent witness for a technical vehicle inspection. Claire Benson looked at the Aston Martin, then at Camille. Search underway? Preliminary inspection. Consent? Kessler turned slightly. That's part of what we're documenting. Claire did not answer him. She walked to Camille instead. I'm Deputy Benson with Carson County. I need 3 answers in your own words. She opened the notebook. Are you under arrest? No. Have they told you that you may leave? Camille looked toward Kessler. No. Claire wrote. Did you consent to a search of the vehicle? No. Pierce shifted beside the driver's door. She was instructed to remain on scene while we… Claire raised one finger without looking at him. I've got his statement separately. Pierce stopped. Claire finished the sentence in her notebook. Kessler came closer. She isn't under arrest. We're resolving a technical issue before anyone moves the vehicle. Claire looked at him. Is she free to leave on foot? Kessler paused. We need her available. Claire wrote that down too. Camille watched the pen. No interpretation. No accusation. Just the wording people chose when they believed the wording was temporary. A dark sedan pulled onto the shoulder. Detective Colin Nash got out carrying a black molded equipment case. He wore plain clothes under a department jacket. He greeted Kessler first, Pierce second. He did not inspect the rear plate. He did not ask to see the registration. Kessler pointed toward the Aston Martin. Possible modification behind the lower center assembly. Nash nodded as if the sentence confirmed something rather than informed him. He set the case on the hood of his sedan and released the latches. Inside, gray foam held several cables, a compact reader, gloves, evidence sleeves, and two fitted connectors. Camille looked once. One connector had the narrow profile used for the type of internal housing behind the Aston Martin's center assembly. Nash selected it before he walked to the car. Camille stayed where she was. Was the vehicle model included in your call? Nash looked at the connector in his hand. I was told what kit to bring. By whom? Kessler answered before he could. Technical response gets what it needs from dispatch. Camille looked toward Claire. She did not ask another question. Nash approached the Aston Martin with the fitted connector and the reader. Claire Benson's pen had stopped above the notebook. Her eyes moved from the unopened lower panel to the tool in Nash's hand, then back to the case he had brought before inspecting the vehicle. She turned to a fresh line and wrote down the time. Before you remove anything, identify what you're looking at. Claire Benson stood beside the Aston Martin with her notebook open against one forearm. Colin Nash had already put on gloves. The fitted connector remained on the hood of his sedan beside the black equipment case. He looked at Claire. I haven't removed anything. That is why I'm asking now. Nash turned toward the center console. Possible aftermarket electronic component. Claire wrote the phrase exactly. Camille stood several yards away. Paul Kessler had allowed her off the roadside shoulder, but not back near the driver's door. She could see the lower edge of the center display through the windshield. Nash used a trim tool from his case. The lower panel released. He did not search behind the glove compartment or under the seats. He worked only in the space Pierce had tried to open by hand. A small black module sat inside the cavity. Flat. Ceramic housing. No manufacturer label visible from where Camille stood. Nash stopped moving for a moment. Pierce leaned closer. That's an interference device. Nash did not answer him. Kessler stepped forward. Could be tied to the financial integrity alert. Claire's pen moved. Sergeant, what are you calling it? Kessler looked at the exposed module. At this point, possible financial fraud instrument. Nash finally spoke. I'd call it an unauthorized network access device until it's examined. Claire looked from one man to the next. Which classification goes on the recovery sheet? Nobody answered immediately. Camille watched Kessler. The object had not changed. Only the language around it had. Nash reached into the cavity and removed the module. Claire checked her watch and wrote down the time. Pierce stepped toward her. You don't need every movement. Then my report will be short. He stopped talking. Nash carried the module to the hood of his sedan. An unused evidence sleeve lay beside the equipment case. He did not put the module inside it. Instead, he connected it to the compact reader he had brought. Claire lowered her notebook. Is that examination part of the recovery process? Field identification. Before packaging? I need to know what category we're dealing with, Kessler said. Proceed. Camille shifted her attention to the reader. Its screen lit. For a few seconds, there was only a progress bar. Then, a single line appeared. Access. Registered. Nash's hand stopped above the reader. He disconnected the module. Claire had seen the message too. What did it register? Reader handshake. Meaning? It recognized access. Claire wrote again. Does that create a record? Nash put the module into the evidence sleeve. It can. Did this one? Nash pressed the adhesive strip closed. I'll determine that during examination. Claire wrote his answer. Kessler took the roadside recovery worksheet from Pierce and looked at the classification field. He did not choose any of the three descriptions. He wrote, Electronic Component Technical Examination Required. That wording was less dramatic. Its consequence was larger. The vehicle goes to Fairwick Vehicle Evidence Center, he said. Camille looked at him. For the module? For the integrity of the examination. The module is already removed. Kessler rested the clipboard against the roof of his cruiser. There may be associated systems. No one had mentioned associated systems before. Camille did not ask him to explain further. She had heard enough versions for one roadside stop. Claire asked, Is the vehicle evidence now? Kessler looked down at the form. It will be retained for examination. Under what authority? Administrative hold, pending technical assessment. Claire wrote that phrase. Pierce moved toward the Aston Martin with a temporary transport tag. Camille checked her phone. A calendar reminder sat at the top of the screen for an afternoon appointment outside Fairwick. She canceled it. The application asked for a reason. She selected unable to attend and closed the screen. Kessler signed the vehicle transfer authorization. Camille watched the pen leave the paper. Am I being detained? No. Can I leave Fairwick? Kessler took a moment before answering. We expect you to remain reasonably available while this is being resolved. Is that a request or a restriction? It is an expectation. Camille nodded once. She did not interpret the word for him. Claire had already heard it. A municipal transport vehicle arrived without lights or siren. The driver spoke only to Pierce, then photographed the Aston Martin from four corners before accepting the keys. Pierce placed a paper transfer tag inside the windshield. Camille could read it from the sidewalk. Destination: Fairwick Vehicle Evidence Center. Nash carried the sealed modules separately. Claire approached him before he reached his sedan. I need the recovery time, the seal identification, and the reader access step included on your property documentation. Nash looked at her. The reader step isn't custody. It happened while you had custody. He held her gaze for a second, then wrote on the worksheet. Pierce watched from the transport vehicle. Kessler said nothing. Camille put her phone back in her coat. The municipal driver started the Aston Martin. Its engine settled into a low idle. For the first time since the stop began, nobody was standing between Camille and the road. It no longer mattered. The car was leaving without her. The transport authorization sat on Kessler's clipboard with his signature at the bottom. The module had entered the afternoon as a hidden object. Within minutes, it had been called an interference device, a financial fraud instrument, an unauthorized network access device, and finally, an electronic component requiring examination. The final description sounded the least accusatory. It was the one that took the entire car. Driver Cooperation. Limited. The words appeared near the top of the vehicle evidence intake summary. Camille read them twice. The public counter at the Fairwick Vehicle Evidence Center was separated from the work area by thick glass. Behind it, an evidence clerk moved between a scanner, two monitors, and a printer that released each page with a soft mechanical pull. Camille had arrived by rideshare. Her Aston Martin was somewhere beyond the locked interior gate. She could not see it. The clerk tapped the screen. This is the owner copy. A printer started behind her. Camille kept looking at the monitor. What does limited cooperation mean here? The clerk followed her finger to the field. That comes from the originating officer. What conduct does it describe? I don't enter that portion. The answer was ordinary enough that the clerk had probably given versions of it many times. She reached for the printed pages. Camille did not. May I read it first? The clerk turned the monitor slightly. The summary listed the vehicle, the recovery location, the technical hold, the sealed electronic component, and the destination facility. Most of it was factual. Then came the behavioral fields. Voluntary technical access. Declined. Driver cooperation. Limited. Roadside disposition. Owner released vehicle retained. Camille read the last line. Released? You weren't booked. I understand. What does it say about whether I was told I could leave? The clerk scrolled. Nothing. What does it say about the county deputy asking that question? Another scroll. Nothing. The clerk rested her hand beside the mouse. If something is missing from the officer narrative, you can submit a supplemental statement. Can the status field be corrected? I can't alter an originating entry. Who can? The originating officer. That was Nolan Pierce. The clerk picked up the desk phone. Camille stopped her with a small motion. I'll take the supplemental form first. The clerk slid a single sheet beneath the glass opening. It had 4 lines for the customer statement. 4. Camille looked at the available space, then at the continuation page checkbox at the bottom. Can I have another page? The clerk pulled one from a drawer. Camille sat at a narrow writing shelf along the wall. She did not write about motives. She wrote sequence. She had not consented to a search. She had complied with instructions to step away from the vehicle. She had answered identification and registration questions. She had remained where officers directed her. She had asked whether she was detained and had been told no. When she asked whether she could leave Fairwick, Sergeant Kessler described continued availability as an expectation. The vehicle had been retained after the electronic component was removed. She stopped there. No adjectives. At the counter, the clerk read the statement before scanning it. Her finger paused over the first page. You're saying you complied, but you didn't consent. Yes. Those aren't the same field in our system. Camille looked at the monitor. Then why is one being used to describe the other? The clerk's hand left the keyboard. I'd have to get Officer Pierce. This time, Camille nodded. Pierce appeared through the secured interior door several minutes later. He no longer wore his roadside vest. His body camera was docked. A stack of forms was tucked under one arm. He looked at Camille, then at the summary on the screen. What's the issue? The cooperation field. Pierce read it. That's accurate. I complied with your instructions. You declined voluntary access. I declined consent. Right. Camille waited. Pierce shifted the forms under his arm. The system doesn't have a separate category for every interaction. The clerk looked down at her keyboard. Camille said, What options does it have? Pierce glanced toward the screen. Full, limited, refused. Did I refuse instructions? No. Did I interfere with the examination? No. Pierce's jaw moved once. You didn't provide full voluntary cooperation. There it was. Not misconduct. A missing favor. Camille looked at the clerk. Please attach my statement. Pierce spoke before the clerk moved. You can attach it. The originating status doesn't change. I'm not asking you to remove anything. Camille pushed the 2 pages under the glass. Attach my words to your category. The clerk scanned them. On the monitor, a small paperclip icon appeared beside Customer Supplement. It sat several lines below the cooperation field. Pierce watched the screen. The reviewer will see it. Camille asked, In what order? The clerk answered, Summary first, attachments after. Pierce turned toward her. That doesn't mean anyone ignores the attachment. Camille said nothing. He had supplied the distinction himself. The clerk printed the completed owner copy. At the bottom, another field had populated automatically from Pierce's intake. Behavioral factors may inform continued technical review. Camille pointed to it. What behavioral factors? Pierce looked at the screen again. The interaction as a whole. Which part? The questions. The refusal of voluntary access. The repeated challenges to process. Camille took the printed copy. On the roadside, she had asked who authorized a search, whether she could leave, and what they were calling the device. Now those questions had become behavioral factors. The clerk placed Camille's supplemental pages behind the summary and stapled the packet at the upper left corner. The first sheet carried the Fairwick seal. The second carried Camille's version. Pierce's radio language did not appear anywhere in the owner copy. Neither did Claire Benson's questions about consent and freedom to leave. The clerk returned to her monitor. A status bar moved across the screen. Intake. Complete. Pending administrative review. Camille folded the packet once and put it in her bag. Nothing on the first page accused her of a crime. That was what made the page useful. The next person would not have to decide whether Camille had obstructed anyone. The system had already given them a smaller word. Limited. And it would be the first word they saw. Kessler's thumb stopped at the corner of Camille's second page. He had been moving through the packet quickly until then. The Fairwick Evidence Center gave supervisors a small review station behind the public counter, separated from the lobby by glass and a waist-high metal door. Camille could see one side of his monitor from where she stood. The first screen was the same intake summary she had received. The supplement sat on paper beside his keyboard. He read the first paragraph again. Then he set it down. Pierce stood several feet behind him, near the evidence room door. He had no paperwork in his hands now. Kessler looked at Camille. "I've reviewed your statement." She nodded once. "And the originating summary?" "Yes." "Before making a decision?" Kessler shifted his chair toward the monitor. "That's what I'm doing now." The clerk from earlier remained at the adjacent terminal, entering seal numbers from a tray of property envelopes. She did not look over. Kessler scrolled. This vehicle was retained for a technical examination after an electronic component was located in an area officers had reason to inspect. Camille let the sentence finish. "The component is already out of the vehicle." "Yes." "Is the vehicle itself still required for examination?" "At this stage, yes." "For what?" Kessler glanced toward Pierce. It was brief. Pierce answered anyway. "Context. Installation. Possible related equipment." Kessler raised one hand slightly. "I'll handle the review." Pierce stepped back. Camille watched Kessler return to the screen. No field listed additional equipment. No field identified damage. No field said the car itself had produced an alert. The summary did contain the behavioral notation. Kessler reached that section. "Your statement says you complied with officer directions." "I did." "And you declined voluntary technical access." "Yes." He looked at the paper. "You also questioned the basis for the inspection several times." "I asked what authority was being used." Kessler tapped the edge of the desk with one finger. "With a vehicle in this class, an unidentified electronic device, and uncertainty about its function, I understand why the officer did not simply release the car roadside." Camille did not answer the part about the vehicle class. Her registration had already answered who owned it. Instead, she pointed toward the paperwork. "Does the review packet contain Deputy Benson's record?" Kessler looked at Pierce. Pierce said, "County was only there for traffic support. Claire Benson had been close enough to document when Nash's equipment touched the module, close enough to ask whether Camille was free to leave." Camille looked back at Kessler. "Do you have her record?" "No." "Did anyone request it?" Kessler clicked through 2 tabs. "Not that I see." The clerk's hand slowed over the property envelopes. Kessler leaned back. "I can only review what has been submitted." Camille looked at the screen, then at the county agency name listed under assisting units. "The file identifies her." "Yes." "But her record wasn't requested." "Not every assisting officer generates material relevant to an administrative hold." Camille left that sentence where he put it. Kessler returned to the summary. A new panel opened. Supervisory Continuation Review. The fields were simple. Originating Summary, reviewed. Kessler checked the box. Owner. Driver Supplement reviewed. He checked that one too. The clerk glanced over now. Kessler continued. Technical basis resolved. He selected No. Then another field appeared. Vehicle Release. Authorized. He selected No. Camille watched the cursor move to the comment box. Kessler typed slowly. Vehicle retention continued, pending completion of technical review and corroboration of originating circumstances. Camille read the last 4 words. What requires corroboration? The roadside circumstances. Which ones? The total interaction. Kessler's answer came faster than the typing had. Camille looked at the 2 acknowledgement boxes. You've marked my statement reviewed. I have. And it says I complied. It says that's your account. Pierce shifted his weight near the secured door. Camille looked at him, then back to Kessler. Does the originating report say I disobeyed an instruction? Kessler scrolled upward. No. Interfered with the search? Another pause. No. Attempted to leave? No. Camille closed her bag. She did not ask him to remove the word limited. That word had already done its work. What time are you submitting the continuation? Kessler looked at the lower corner of the screen. The system records it. Good. He studied her for a second, then clicked Submit. The printer behind the clerk woke. One page came out. Then another. The clerk collected them and brought the first sheet to the glass. The header read Supervisory Vehicle Retention Notice. Below it, the reason was no longer simply technical. Continued technical review. Originating circumstance corroboration. The category was broader than the one Camille had walked in with. She read the release section. No estimated completion time. That's correct, Kessler said. Who controls the next review? Technical unit completes its work. Then, administration clears the hold. Pierce no longer had to defend the roadside decision by himself. The technical unit could point to administration. Administration could point to the originating circumstances. The originating circumstances were summarized by Pierce. Camille folded the notice and put it behind yesterday's intake copy. Her phone showed the rideshare she had ordered approaching the facility. The driver sent the standard message asking which entrance to use. Camille typed, "Public entrance, glass doors." Kessler was already gathering the packet. The clerk stopped him. "Sergeant." He turned. She pointed at her terminal. "For the audit entry, do you want both source documents recorded as reviewed before continuation?" Kessler looked at the screen. "Yes." "The owner supplement too?" "I checked it." The clerk entered the acknowledgement. 2 new lines appeared in the internal history. Camille could not read them from the lobby. She could see the clerk's face. The woman looked once at Camille's supplemental pages, once at Kessler's signed continuation notice, then back at the monitor. She entered the time. Only after that did she scan the pages into the closed review file. At 4:47, the technical light beside the evidence room door changed from amber to green. Camille had been sitting beneath a wall clock for 36 minutes. The Fairwick Vehicle Evidence Center had emptied around her in small increments. One clerk removed a cash drawer. Another rolled a gray cart through the secured door. A printer, near the public counter, had stopped receiving jobs. Nash came out carrying a single sheet. The Vesper module was not with him. He passed the paper to the evidence clerk. She scanned it before Camille could read the header. Nash looked toward her. "The vehicle examination is complete." Camille stood. "Does the vehicle need to remain for technical examination?" "No." The answer came without qualification. "What remains?" "The component stays in evidence." "The car?" "Nothing further from my unit." Nash signed the clerk's electronic pad. The monitor updated. Camille could see the new status from the lobby side. Technical disposition vehicle cleared. Below it, component retained for separate analysis. Kessler had said technical review came first. Administration cleared the hold after that. Camille looked at the wall clock. 13 minutes before 5. "Who releases the vehicle?" The clerk checked another screen. "Administrative review has to close the retention." "Kessler?" "He's the reviewing supervisor." "Is he here?" The clerk picked up the desk phone. No answer. She tried a radio extension. A voice responded through the receiver, too faint for Camille to make out. The clerk hung up. "He's away from the building. Can another supervisor close it?" "Not once a restricted continuation has been assigned." Camille took out the supervisory notice from her bag. The fold had softened along the middle. It said the vehicle would remain pending technical review and corroboration of originating circumstances. "One of those is finished." "Yes." "What specifically remains incomplete?" The clerk opened the review queue. "Administrative reconciliation." "With what?" The clerk clicked the case. A new attachment icon appeared while she was looking at it. She stopped, then opened it. The county seal was at the top. Assisting Agency Incident Supplement. Claire Benson's name appeared underneath. The clerk read the first page. Camille stayed where she was. "Is that Deputy Benson's report?" The clerk nodded. "It just came through the interagency mailbox." "What time?" 4:51. 9 minutes before the administrative desk closed. The clerk scrolled. Her hand slowed. Claire had written the sequence as she had observed it. She arrived after Pierce had already positioned Camille away from the Aston Martin. Camille had asked whether the examination was voluntary. Pierce had said officers were proceeding under their own authority. Claire had asked whether Camille was detained. No arrest or detention basis had been stated to her. Then came the technical sequence. The lower compartment had been opened. Nash's equipment had been brought forward. The device was located. Claire also recorded 2 system request notifications that Pierce received while she was present. Both carried times after the physical inspection had begun. The clerk returned to the top of the report. "Does Sergeant Kessler have access to this now?" Camille asked. "Yes." "Does it satisfy the request for corroboration?" "I can't make that determination." "Can he?" "Yes." "Tonight?" The clerk looked toward the dark supervisory station. "I don't know." The minute hand moved. Camille rested both palms against the public counter. "Not hard. How long does vehicle release take after the administrative hold is closed?" "Usually a few minutes." "And if it's closed after 5? The clerk looked at the screen again. "Restricted vehicles aren't released through the after-hours property window. So the earliest physical release would be tomorrow, if it doesn't clear before the desk closes." The clock changed. 5. The clerk's terminal produced a small notification tone. A yellow banner appeared. "Public vehicle release. Closed." Camille looked through the interior glass. Her car was somewhere past 2 locked doors and an evidence yard gate. The technical unit had finished. The independent county record had arrived. Neither fact opened a door. The clerk printed Nash's disposition and gave Camille a copy. It contained the completion time, 4:47. She printed the county report receipt, 4:51. Then the terminal added a third entry, "Administrative hold, after-hours continuation," effective at 5. Camille read the 3 times in order. Was that continuation entered by Sergeant Kessler? The clerk checked. No. The system converts unresolved restricted holds automatically when public release closes. Does he have to approve it? Not tonight. That was new. An officer had started the search. A supervisor had continued it. Now the clock could keep the vehicle. Camille asked for a copy of the status history. The clerk hesitated. "Internal history isn't normally customer-facing." "Then give me the documents I'm entitled to receive showing each current status." The clerk printed 3 pages. Camille checked the headers before putting them in her bag. She was tired enough now that the lines on the paper took longer to settle into order. She drank from the water fountain beside the lobby doors, wiped 1 drop from the front of her sleeve, and returned to the counter. "Does the vehicle accrue any municipal storage charge overnight?" "No." "Does the evidence center document that release was unavailable after technical clearance?" The clerk looked toward the yellow banner. "The status history does." Camille nodded. That was enough. For now. Through the glass, the clerk attached Claire's report to the review queue. She did not place it beneath Pierce's original summary. The system did that automatically. Originating summary first. Supervisor continuation second. Owner statement third. Technical disposition fourth. County report fifth. Camille watched the attachment list settle into place. Every document needed to question the hold was now inside Fairwick's own system, just not at the top. She left carrying the 3 printed status pages. Behind her, the lobby door locked at 5:12. By then, the vehicle was no longer being held because technicians needed it. It was being held because the office that could admit that fact had closed. At the top of the Fairwick case screen, above Claire Benson's county supplement, a new sentence had appeared overnight. Digital review corroborated field indicators associated with vehicle control and component recovery. Cammy read it once. Kessler stood behind the public counter with one hand resting beside the keyboard. The Aston Martin had been cleared for release. A green authorization box occupied the right side of his monitor. He had not clicked it yet. "The technical unit doesn't require the car," he said. "The component remains separately retained." Camille nodded toward the sentence. "When was the digital review initiated?" Kessler glanced at the screen. "It occurred during the field assessment." "That isn't a time." His fingers moved off the keyboard. The records checks were part of the same continuous contact. Camille said nothing. Kessler opened the county supplement. Claire's report displayed beneath his new note. Her chronology was simple. When she arrived, Pierce had already moved Camille away from the driver's side. The lower compartment was being examined. Claire later observed 2 electronic notifications on Pierce's device. Both came afterward. Kessler scrolled past that paragraph. "The county deputy wasn't the originating officer," he said. "No. She wouldn't necessarily know what had already been requested." Camille looked at him. "Then the request record should answer it." Kessler's jaw shifted once. He called Nash. The technical examiner arrived, carrying a thin folder and a paper cup without a lid. He set both beside the counter scanner. Kessler turned the monitor slightly. I need the origin timing on the field database requests. Nash opened the folder. I included the request references in the component supplement. X-test. Creation time? Nash ran his finger down the page. The first electronic request was created at 2:17. Kessler looked back at Claire's report. Her documented arrival was earlier. The compartment was already open when she arrived. The officer could have initiated a verbal check before that, Kessler said. Nash kept his finger on the line. I don't document verbal requests. I'm asking whether that's possible. Possible isn't in my report. The evidence clerk at the next station stopped feeding release envelopes into a printer. She did not turn around. Camille watched Kessler return to his keyboard. He opened his overnight sentence for editing. For several seconds, the cursor blinked after the word recovery. Then he closed the edit window. I'm not changing the case note, he said. Camille looked at the screen. I'm not asking you to. That made him look at her. She continued. Does the system preserve when that note was entered? Yes. And Nash's request supplement? Yes. All right. Kessler sat down. He opened a new form. Case sequence clarification. The box underneath was blank. He typed slowly. The digital review, he wrote, had occurred as one element of a continuing field assessment and was not intended to represent the sole predicate for physical inspection. Electronic request timestamps reflected system creation and transmission events and did not necessarily capture earlier officer observations or verbal investigative steps. He stopped. Read it. Added another sentence. The component recovery was based on the totality of circumstances observed during the contact. Camille saw the phrase appear. No new circumstance was listed. Kessler submitted the clarification. The system stamped it with the morning time and placed it directly below the overnight note. Claire's county report moved one position lower. Nash collected his paper cup. Before leaving, he looked toward Camille. The full reader session is separate from that supplement. Kessler turned. What reader session? The diagnostic access history. The unit stores its own operator events. We already have the chain form. The chain form records custody. The session audit records access. Kessler's hand remained on the mouse. Is there anything in it that changes your technical disposition? No. Then it's not relevant to vehicle release. Nash shrugged once. I didn't say it was. He returned through the secured door. Camille watched it close behind him. Kessler clicked the green authorization box. The printer produced the release document. Vehicle release. Administrative retention closed. The Vesper module remained listed separately as retained evidence. The clerk brought Camille's key fob from a numbered drawer and placed it in a shallow plastic tray. A strip of white evidence tape still crossed the metal ring. Camille checked the release sheet. The technical clearance remained dated the previous afternoon. Claire's report receipt remained 4 minutes later. The overnight hold followed after both. Nothing on the release sheet explained why the vehicle had required another night. Is the administrative file closed? She asked. The vehicle portion is. The incident file? No. Kessler removed his reading glasses. There are still reporting issues to reconcile. Whose reporting issues? His hand stopped halfway to the glasses case. Multiple source. Camille folded the release sheet once. That answer was different from yesterday. Yesterday, the uncertainty had belonged to her. Her vehicle, her explanation, her possession of a high-value car, her response to the module under the lower panel. Now the uncertainty belonged to the records. She walked through the secured gate with the clerk. The Aston Martin sat in the first release bay. A paper evidence tag remained beneath the passenger side wiper. The rear plate had been placed inside a clear property sleeve on the front seat rather than reattached. Camille opened the driver's door. The seat was farther back than she kept it. She adjusted it without comment. The clerk handed her a property checklist. Plate is in the vehicle. Technical unit didn't reinstall exterior items. Camille signed only for receipt of the car and the loose plate. Then she looked toward the evidence building windows. Behind the glass, Kessler was still at the same workstation. A new attachment had appeared in the file before Camille left the gate. She had seen only its title. Reader session, audit access history. No one at the public counter had opened it yet. The warning appeared before Camille reached the first intersection. Service required. She pulled into the first safe parking lot and shut the Aston Martin off. The rear plate was still inside its clear property sleeve on the passenger seat. A white evidence tag remained under the windshield wiper. Below the dashboard, one amber symbol stayed illuminated after the other startup indicators disappeared. Camille took a photograph, then another. She did not open the lower panel. Fairwick had already done enough of that. By late morning, the car sat inside an authorized service bay. Camille had arranged transport rather than drive it farther, with the plate still loose and an unexplained warning active. The service advisor scanned the vehicle identification number from the windshield. His monitor loaded the maintenance history. No second look at Camille. No question about why she owned the car. No request for another document after her registration matched the service record. He walked around the Aston Martin with a tablet. "Rear plate mount is intact," he said. "We can reinstall that." He crouched near the passenger side. "The lower trim isn't seated correctly." Camille watched him press one corner gently. It moved. "Was work done here?" "Police examination." He stopped pressing. "Then I'm not going farther until we document it." That sentence cost her less time than every explanation Fairwick had given her. The advisor took photographs before touching anything else. When he returned, he had an estimate printed on white paper. Several mounting clips had been damaged or left unusable. One connection associated with the removed component remained open. The vehicle could be made roadworthy, but the full system check could not be completed without the missing module or manufacturer-level replacement authorization. "Warranty?" Camille asked. He tapped the estimate. "Not for damage from outside removal, at least not without review." "How much can you complete today?" "Plate, trim, basic inspection." "And the warning?" "Not fully." The diagnostic charge sat at the bottom of the page. So did the transport fee Camille had already paid. Neither amount was catastrophic. They were simply hers now. Her phone vibrated. A Fairwick Records notification. Camille opened it while the advisor carried the estimate back to his desk. Requested case material available. One attachment had the title she had seen the previous morning. Reader, Session Audit Access History. She downloaded the document. The first page was not a technical report. It was an event list. Operator. Session start. Device identifier. Automatic classification response. Session and. Nash's name appeared beside the first recorded access. The session began on the roadside. Before the vehicle entered Fairwick evidence custody, Camille moved to the next line. The reader had returned an initial device category during that session. Passive data storage. Telemetry class. Below it, active vehicle command function. Not detected. Camille read the wording again. It did not identify ownership. It did not explain why the module was behind the panel. It did not prove the device harmless in every possible respect. But it did establish something narrower. Fairwick's technical reader had not been staring at a completely unidentified object. Not by the time the roadside session ended. Camille opened the retention notice from the previous day. Kessler's language described an unidentified electronic component whose function remained unresolved during the continuing review. She placed the phone beside the printed service estimate. 2 records. Different institutions. Neither required interpretation from her. The advisor returned with a small plastic bag containing 2 broken trim clips. "We replaced these." He put the bag beside the estimate. "Keep them?" Camille looked at the pieces. "Yes. We know they're." He stapled the service photographs to the invoice. Another email arrived. This one came directly from Fairwick. Kessler. Component status update. Camille opened it. The Vesper module would remain in evidence pending origin verification and review of installation circumstances. She called the number in the signature block. Kessler answered after several rings. "This is Sergeant Kessler. I received the component status." "Yes. What is being verified now?" "Origin. Installation. How it came to be in the vehicle." "Is there a criminal referral?" A pause. "Not at this time." "Has the technical classification changed?" "What do you mean?" "I received the reader audit." Nothing from his side for a moment except a faint office sound, paper moving against a desk. Kessler spoke again. That audit is preliminary machine output. I understand. It isn't a final technical determination. I didn't say it was. He exhaled through his nose. The issue isn't limited to whether the device actively controls the vehicle. That was the new boundary. Camille looked at the service invoice. Then send me the current basis in writing. You already have the status update. Good. She ended the call. The service advisor returned the key fob that afternoon. The rear plate was mounted again. The lower trim sat flush. The amber warning remained. He circled the unresolved line on the invoice. System restoration. Incomplete original component. Unavailable. Camille paid. She photographed the receipt before putting it in her bag. On the way out, she checked the Fairwick portal once more. Kessler had added a new incident note. It had been entered after their call. Component origin review initiated. Field function remained undetermined at time of recovery. Camille opened the reader audit beside it. The first session had already classified the device before the roadside evidence process ended. She did not call Kessler again. The two records could meet later. For now, Fairwick's newest sentence remained exactly where he had placed it. And the system kept the older one underneath. The two broken trim clips sat in a clear plastic bag beside Camille's laptop. The service advisor had written the date on the bag in black marker. Camille placed it above the invoice, then opened the Fairwick case portal. She had stopped reading the file as a story. Stories depended too much on order chosen by whoever told them. She read it as a ledger. Roadside contact. County arrival. First electronic request. Reader session. Component recovery. Vehicle transfer. Supervisory continuation. Technical clearance. County report. After-hours retention. Vehicle release. Reader audit. Origin review. Each item had a time. That morning, another document appeared between the original officer narrative and Kessler's case sequence clarification. Originating officer supplement. Author. Nolan Pierce. Camille opened it. The first paragraph repeated facts already in the file. Rear registration visibility concern. Driver identity confirmed. Vehicle ownership confirmed. Electronic component recovered from lower center compartment. Then Pierce added a paragraph that had not appeared before. According to the supplement, Camille had displayed an unusual degree of concern regarding the lower interior panel during the roadside encounter. Her repeated questions about that area, combined with the high-value vehicle and uncertainty surrounding the concealed component, had contributed to his decision to continue the inspection. Camille stopped there. Not because the sentence surprised her, because it solved something too neatly. She opened Claire Benson's county report beside it. Claire's chronology recorded Kessler directing personnel toward the lower center area before Camille asked Nash whether the vehicle model had been included in his call. Camille opened Nash's recovery worksheet. The technical response location had already been entered. Lower center assembly. Then she opened the original Pierce narrative. His first version did not mention Camille showing concern about the panel. It mentioned evasiveness, possibly concealment, declined voluntary access. The panel concern was new. Camille clicked Document Details. The supplement had been created that morning, after the reader audit became available, after Kessler's component origin review, after Camille had asked Kessler for the current written basis. The file preserved another field. Related review request. Component origin, installation. The request had been assigned to Pierce shortly before he created the supplement. Camille wrote the times on a legal pad. No conclusion. Just the order. Her phone stayed face down. She had no reason to call Pierce. He had already said what he wanted the record to say. Camille returned to the county report. Claire had written that Camille asked about the lower panel equipment after Nash arrived with a technical kit and after Fairwick personnel identified the area to be examined. The question that Pierce now described as suspicious had followed the disclosure. It had not preceded it. Camille opened Fairwick's records request page. She selected preservation request rather than complaint. The form allowed a short description. She typed, "Please preserve all versions. Metadata, assignment history, creation timestamps, edits, attachments, and access logs associated with the originating officer narrative and supplements for this incident. She added the same request for Kessler's case sequence clarification. Then the reader session audit. She did not mention racism. She did not mention retaliation. She did not have to name the mechanism before preserving it. The confirmation email arrived within a minute. Records preservation request received. Camille saved it locally. Then she returned to Pierce's supplement. There was another sentence near the bottom. Drivers' responses were inconsistent with ordinary owner familiarity regarding installed vehicle equipment. Camille read that one more slowly. The Vesper module had been concealed behind trim. Fairwick's own service-related records now showed that accessing it required removing the lower panel. Pierce's sentence assumed she should have known about something officers had treated as hidden. It also used that assumed ignorance against her. On the roadside, ownership papers had not been enough to make her ordinary. Now, not knowing about concealed hardware in her own car was being used as evidence that her ownership behavior was unusual. Camille opened her original registration confirmation, then the insurance verification, then the authorized service history. Her name matched across all of them. The documents had been independently verified days earlier. Pierce's new paragraph did not challenge ownership directly. It did something narrower. It made ownership itself carry an expectation she had supposedly failed. The portal refreshed. Kessler had acknowledged the supplement. A new status line appeared. Origin review. Supplemental field basis received. Camille looked at the time. Only a few minutes after Pierce submitted it. The system did not show Kessler challenging the sequence. It showed acceptance. She downloaded the updated case index. The PDF contained a document history table. Pierce's original narrative had one creation entry. His new supplement had another. Kessler's original supervisory continuation had another. His later clarification had another. The versions were not replacing each other. They were stacking. Camille printed the history. The pages came out warm. She laid them across the hotel desk. The first explanation had depended on an electronic concern. The electronic request came later than the physical inspection. The next explanation treated everything as one continuous field assessment. The reader audit then showed Fairwick had received an early technical classification. The next explanation shifted to origin. Now, Pierce had supplied a behavioral reason for why officers supposedly focused on the hidden area in the first place. The reason had been written days after the roadside encounter. Camille placed Claire's report beside Pierce's supplement. One sentence in each referred to the same question. Claire placed Camille's question after Fairwick identified the panel. Pierce used the question as part of the reason Fairwick focused on the panel. Same words. Opposite. Direction of causation. Camille photographed the pages together. Her laptop gave the soft tone of another incoming message. Fairwick records. Her preservation request had been accepted. The response included the categories now protected from routine alteration. Narrative history. Supervisor amendments. Technical access records. Assignment logs. Attachment metadata. Camille read the list once. Then she closed the laptop. Pierce's supplement remained active. So did Kessler's origin review. The Vesper module remained in evidence. Nobody had admitted anything. Fairwick still controlled the incident file. But the newest attempt to explain the first search had created something the original stop never had. A permanent record of when the explanation was written. The records clerk stopped scrolling. Her index finger remained on the mouse wheel. Camille stood on the public side of the counter with the preservation receipt folded inside her notebook. She had asked for the activity export associated with the records already placed under preservation. Nothing more. The clerk leaned closer to the monitor. There's a linked workflow event. Camille waited. What kind? Supervisor advisory. Before or after the incident? The clerk looked at the time field again. Before. She printed the page. The laser printer pulled one sheet, paused, then produced two more. The first page was administrative. Case container. Vehicle identifier. Assigned units. Event relationships. The second page contained a line Camille had never seen in the public incident packet. Supervisor. Advisory vehicle contact support. Created at 1:58 in the afternoon. Pierce's documented roadside contact began 8 minutes later. Camille moved down the page. Vehicle: black Aston Martin. Registration: non-locale. Category: high-value vehicle verification. Technical support field: lower center interior. Possible aftermarket data unit. The next entry showed delivery. Pierce received the advisory before the stop. Another line appeared beneath it. Technical standby Nash. Assigned 2 minutes before roadside contact. Camille read all 3 lines again. Not quickly. The clerk returned to the monitor. This may be administrative routing. What does that mean? It can be information sent to units before a case is formally opened. Does the system preserve who sent it? Yes. Who? The clerk clicked the event. The sender field expanded. G. Kessler. Camille did not move. The monitor fan ran behind the glass. A telephone rang at a desk farther back. Someone answered it and continued speaking at the same low volume. The clerk scrolled farther. There was a field called Source Reference. It did not contain a person. It contained another internal event number. That source record isn't in my request, Camille said. No. Can I request it? You can request anything. Whether it's releasable is separate. Camille nodded. Print the event relationship. The clerk did. On the new page, the supervisor advisory pointed to 3 later records. Pierce's roadside incident. Nash's technical session. Kessler's supervisory review. The arrows were automatic system links. Camille took out Pierce's newest supplement. The sentence was still there. Her unusual degree of concern regarding the lower interior panel had contributed to his decision to continue inspection. She set the supplement beside the workflow export. The advisory naming the lower center interior existed before Pierce documented contact with her. Nash had been placed on technical standby before that contact as well. The clerk read the pages from her side of the glass. Her mouth tightened slightly. This export doesn't tell us why the advisory was generated. No. Camille touched the first timestamp with one finger, but it tells us when. The clerk looked toward a small policy placard attached to the side of her monitor. Pre-contact advisories aren't necessarily investigative findings. I didn't call it one. They can be officer safety, coordination, technical routing. Which field says that? The clerk stopped. She returned to the export. There was no officer safety label, no hazard flag, no stolen vehicle alert, no warrant notice. The routing category remained high-value vehicle verification. The lower panel note remained exactly where it had been generated. The clerk picked up the phone. This time she called Kessler. Camille could hear only her half. I have a preserved workflow export tied to the Avery incident. A pause. The supervisor advisory. Another pause. Yes, the pre-contact one. The clerk turned slightly away from the counter. No, I haven't interpreted it. She requested the preserved activity history. She listened, then wrote something on a yellow pad. All right. She hung up. Sergeant Kessler says the advisory was administrative support information. It wasn't the legal basis for the contact. Camille looked at the page. Is that explanation already in the record? No. Then please don't add it to my request response as if it were. The clerk placed the pen down. I won't. That was all, Camille said. She opened the original incident narrative. Pierce had written that the contact began over rear registration visibility. No mention of a pre-contact supervisor advisory. No mention of Nash being on standby. No mention that the exact lower interior area later searched had already been described in Fairwick's workflow. She moved to Kessler's first supervisory continuation. Nothing. His case sequence clarification. Nothing. His origin review. Nothing. Then Pierce's late supplement. That document finally mentioned Camille's supposed concern with the lower panel, but not the advisory. The clerk printed the full workflow history. The export showed access times too. Pierce had opened the advisory before initiating the formal incident. Kessler opened it again during supervisory review. Then once more on the morning Pierce was assigned to write his supplement. Camille looked at that final access entry. Is that read access? Yes. Not an edit? Correct. So the advisory was opened before the supplement was created. Yes? The clerk's answer came more slowly this time. Camille placed the workflow export beside the supplement. Pierce had written that Camille's behavior helped direct attention to the lower panel. The system showed he had already been told about the lower panel before speaking to her. Kessler had later reviewed the same advisory before acknowledging Pierce's new account. The contradiction did not depend on Claire remembering correctly. It did not depend on Camille's screenshots. It did not depend on whether a preliminary reader classification was technically complete. Fairwick had recorded both sides itself. The clerk returned the documents through the slot beneath the glass. Your preservation hold covers this export. Camille put the pages into her notebook. What about the source event? I can add it to the request. Please do. The clerk typed. On the monitor, the active incident still showed component origin review. Nothing had closed. Nothing had been returned. Pierce's supplement remained part of the file. Kessler still controlled the review. Camille walked toward the lobby door. Before she reached it, the clerk called her name. Camille turned. The clerk pointed to one final line on the printed activity export. The advisory had not been created after Pierce called Kessler from the roadside. It had not been created when Nash arrived. It had not been created after Camille asked about the panel. It had been delivered before the stop existed in Fairwick's incident system. The lower panel had begun as a destination. Only later had the record tried to make it look like a discovery. Supervisory clarification. Advisory scope. The phrase appeared in Camille's portal before breakfast. She opened the document without touching the older files. Kessler had written it the previous evening. The first paragraph addressed the pre-contact advisory discovered in the preserved workflow history. The advisory, he wrote, had provided general technical awareness regarding possible aftermarket equipment in certain luxury vehicles. It had not directed Pierce to stop Camille, extend the encounter, search a particular compartment, or seize any device. The second paragraph used one word 3 times. Independent. Pierce independently observed the rear registration condition. Pierce independently assessed Camille's roadside responses. Pierce independently determined that further vehicle examination was appropriate. Camille opened the workflow export beside it. Kessler's advisory had named her Aston Martin. It had carried her registration. It had specified lower center interior. Nash had been assigned technical standby before Pierce's incident existed. Camille did not need to decide what that meant yet. Kessler had just decided what he wanted it to mean. A portal notification showed the source event attachment had also been released. She opened that next. It was less dramatic than the advisory. That made it more useful. The source was a regional technical bulletin circulated several weeks earlier. It described aftermarket telemetry equipment found in certain performance and luxury vehicle platforms. The document included diagrams of common installation locations. One diagram showed a lower center interior compartment on Camille's vehicle platform. The bulletin did not contain Camille's name. It did not contain her plate. It did not identify her car. It did not report stolen property, fraud, a wanted driver, or a specific threat. At the bottom was a distribution list. Fairwick Police Department had received it. Kessler had opened it several times. That explained how he knew the location. It did not explain why a general diagram had become a vehicle-specific advisory for Camille before Pierce spoke to her. By late morning, Camille was back at Fairwick Records. The clerk printed the attachment and placed it beneath the glass. The bulletin is the source event? That's what the relationship field shows. And the vehicle-specific advisory was created from this? The clerk checked the screen. Yes. By Sergeant Kessler. Yes. Camille put the bulletin beside the advisory. Generic vehicle platform. Specific plate. Generic installation location. Specific technical standby assignment. The transformation existed on paper. A door behind the records counter opened. Kessler entered carrying a thin folder. He did not approach Camille immediately. He spoke to the clerk first, then signed an internal routing sheet. His movements were slower than they had been during the earlier supervisory review. When he came to the counter, he set the folder down but kept one hand on it. I saw your latest request. Camille nodded. I wanted to make sure the clarification wasn't misunderstood. Which part? The advisory. She waited. Kessler glanced at the printed bulletin. That material goes to multiple agencies. Knowing that a component can exist in a certain location is not the same as directing an officer to search there. Camille looked at the vehicle-specific advisory. Then why did your advisory include my plate? Kessler's thumb stopped against the folder edge. It was a coordination note. And Nash? Availability. For my vehicle? For the possibility technical support might be needed. Camille moved one page forward. The standby assignment contained the same registration. Kessler saw it. His explanation changed shape without changing volume. Assignments can be populated with incident-related information for efficiency. There wasn't an incident yet. The formal incident hadn't been opened. That was different. Camille let the sentence remain where he put it. Kessler opened his folder. Inside was a printed copy of his clarification. I don't want the administrative workflow confused with the legal basis for Pierce's actions. Was Pierce told about the lower panel before contact? He received the advisory. Was Nash assigned before contact? Yes. Did you create both? I created the advisory. Technical routing is system-assisted. Camille looked at him. Who selected Nash? Kessler lowered his eyes to the clarification. I initiated the support request. Another line added itself to the chronology. Camille did not write it down in front of him. Kessler continued. The point is that Pierce still had to make his own field determination. His earlier case sequence clarification had described the stop as a continuous assessment involving field officers, supervisory review, and technical support. Now the parts were becoming separate. Kessler provided awareness. Pierce made decisions. Nash provided support. The system routed information. Each piece was smaller when spoken alone. Camille asked, "Does Pierce agree with this clarification?" Kessler looked toward the clerk. It was routed to him. That wasn't my question. The line came out before she could stop it. She disliked the familiar shape of it immediately. So she changed course. What does the acknowledgement field show? The clerk turned back to the monitor. Kessler did not answer for her. Pierce acknowledged receipt this morning, she said. Agreement? No agreement field. Camille nodded. And Nash? The clerk scrolled. There was a longer pause. Nash hasn't acknowledged it. Kessler's shoulders shifted once beneath his uniform shirt. He may not have seen it. The clerk clicked the access history. He opened it. Kessler turned toward the screen. When? The clerk gave the time. More than 2 hours earlier. The status still read, acknowledgement pending. Kessler reached for the folder, then stopped with his fingers resting on the top sheet. He's technical staff. He may not consider a supervisory narrative something he needs to respond to immediately. The clerk said nothing. Camille looked again at the clarification. Near the bottom, Kessler had written, technical personnel were present solely to assist with conditions identified independently by the originating officer. Nash had received his vehicle-specific standby assignment before Pierce's documented contact. That did not prove what Nash believed, but it explained why his acknowledgement mattered. Kessler closed the folder. The origin review is still open, he said. That hasn't changed. Is the component still being held? Yes. Under whose authorization? Kessler paused. Current evidence retention is supervisory. Yours? At this stage? Yes. There it was. He had separated himself from the beginning while keeping control of the end. Camille folded the new printouts into her notebook. She did not tell Kessler what conclusion to draw. The preserved records already contained his advisory, Pierce's supplement, the reader audit, the source bulletin, the technical standby assignment, and now his clarification. Each document had been created for a different purpose. Together, they showed the language moving. At the door, Camille checked the portal once more. Pierce, receipt acknowledged. Nash, acknowledgement pending. The document had been opened. The box remained unchecked. Nash set the form on the records counter and pushed it back toward Kessler. The certification box was still empty. Camille stood several feet away, beside the narrow shelf where visitors were supposed to review documents without blocking the counter. She had come for the scheduled status review on the Vesper module. Nobody had told her Nash would be there. His technical badge hung from a black clip at his belt. No uniform, no duty belt. A blue pen remained uncapped in his right hand. Kessler kept his voice low. You opened this yesterday. I did. So acknowledge it. I can acknowledge receiving it. Nash tapped the bottom paragraph with the pen. This is more than receipt. The form carried Kessler's clarification on the first page. The second page contained a routing section with 3 boxes: received, reviewed, certified accurate as to employee role and sequence. Pierce's electronic receipt already appeared beside the first box. Nash had marked nothing. Kessler pulled the form closer. The certification only concerns your part. My part starts before the contact. Kessler's fingers stopped at the corner of the sheet. The records clerk turned from her monitor but did not speak. Camille stayed where she was. Nash took the form back and pointed to the sentence Kessler had written the day before. Technical personnel were present solely to assist with conditions identified independently by the originating officer. I can't certify that sequence. You weren't roadside when Pierce initiated the contact? Correct. Then you're not certifying his basis. I'm certifying mine. Kessler closed his mouth. Nash placed a second document beside the clarification. It was the technical standby assignment Camille had already seen in the preserved workflow. Her registration, her Aston Martin, the lower center interior location, Nash's employee identifier. The assignment existed before Pierce's formal incident entry. Kessler glanced toward Camille, then back to Nash. That assignment didn't direct a search. I didn't say it did. It was precautionary support. Nash nodded once. That wording is fine. Kessler reached for the pen. Then we can clarify it. Nash did not hand him the pen. What isn't fine is saying I responded to a condition Pierce identified. I had the vehicle and location before I received anything from Pierce. The clerk lowered her eyes to the screen. Her hands stayed off the keyboard. Kessler leaned one forearm against the counter. The system populated identifying information after I initiated a general technical request. Nash turned the assignment toward him. The location field wasn't populated by the system. Kessler read the line. He read it again. The field identified the lower center interior. Beside it was an originating employee field. Kessler's identifié. Camille had seen both before. The information was not new. Nash saying what he could and could not certify was. Kessler straightened. This isn't an investigative interview. No. You're being asked to document your technical role. That's what I'm trying to do. Nash capped the pen. For several seconds, nobody touched the paperwork. Then the records clerk said, if the employee disputes the scope language, I need separate wording. I can't mark the routing complete. Kessler turned toward her. It's not a dispute. It's clarification. The clerk moved the mouse. The available status says factual qualification. Kessler looked at the monitor. Use that. She did not click. It requires the employee statement first. Nash pulled a blank internal statement sheet from the folder. Kessler watched him write. Camille could hear the pen move over the paper. Nash did not write quickly. When he finished the first paragraph, he read it once and crossed out a single word. He initialed the correction. Then he continued. The final statement was short. He had received a vehicle-specific technical standby assignment identifying Camille's Aston Martin and a lower center interior location before receiving a field request from Pierce. He had not selected the vehicle. He had not originated the stop. He had not independently identified the lower compartment. His role had been limited to technical handling once the roadside process reached the point where his assistance was requested. He could not certify that his involvement began because of a condition first identified by Pierce. Nash signed beneath it. The clerk date-stamped the page. Kessler watched the stamp come down. A small mechanical click. Nash slid the statement across. Kessler did not pick it up immediately. You understand this may require another level of review. Nash put the capped pen in his shirt pocket. Yes. And delay the component disposition. Yes. I didn't. Camille's jaw tightened once. The module had already been unavailable for days. Another review meant another delay created by a problem she had not introduced. She asked the clerk, will both statements remain attached? Yes. Without replacing either one? Yes. Please preserve them that way. Kessler turned slightly toward her. Miss Carter, this isn't changing the underlying retention decision today. Camille kept her hands on the edge of her document folder. I heard you. The component remains under supervisory hold. Under your authorization? Kessler paused. Yes. Nash looked at him. The movement was small, but Camille caught it. Kessler had spent the previous day narrowing his connection to the beginning of the sequence. He still owned the continuing deprivation. The clerk scanned Nash's statement. A progress bar moved across the monitor. Kessler opened the clarification again. We should be precise here. Technical advance awareness does not establish that Pierce's later assessment was improper. Nash said nothing. I never said it did, Camille replied. Kessler shifted the page. The concern is that separate administrative records are being read as one operational instruction. Camille glanced at the standby assignment. Were they separate when you created them? Kessler did not answer immediately. The scanner finished. The clerk returned to the routing screen. A new menu appeared. She selected Factual Qualification Received. Another field opened beneath it. Supervisory Account, contested by Employee Scope Statement. Kessler leaned toward the screen. Contested is too strong. The clerk pointed to the options. There isn't a neutral version. Use Supplemental Clarification. That closes the employee statement under yours. Nash shook his head. Don't do that. The clerk kept her hand on the mouse. Kessler looked from Nash to the screen. The old process had worked because each later record could be treated as an explanation of the one before it. Now, one employee was refusing to let his statement be placed beneath Kessler's explanation. Kessler stepped back. Use contested. The clerk clicked. The portal refreshed. The origin review no longer showed Kessler as sole completing authority. A new line appeared beneath the active component hold. Conflicting employee statements. Secondary review required. Kessler still controlled the module that afternoon. He no longer controlled the only version of why it was there. The records counter was gone from the process. Camille sat at one end of a narrow conference table on the second floor of Fairwick's administrative building. Kessler sat across from her. Nash had a chair near the wall. The records clerk worked from a laptop connected to the room's only monitor. At the head of the table, Leah Morgan placed a yellow folder beside the keyboard. She was Fairwick's administrative review manager. Her badge carried no technical designation and no supervisory operations title. Conflicting employee statements automatically routed to her office. Kessler slid a 3-page memorandum toward her. Morgan left it where it stopped. I'll read the summary after the source records. Kessler's hand remained beside the memorandum for a second. It's meant to provide context. I understand. Morgan turned toward the clerk. Creation order. The first document appeared on the monitor. The Regional Technical Bulletin. It described a broad equipment concern affecting certain high-end vehicles. No driver names, no plate numbers, no mention of Camille, no instruction to inspect her Aston Martin. Morgan read the title, Issuing Office and Distribution Field. Next, Kessler had opened the bulletin. That access event had already been preserved. Next came the vehicle-specific advisory. Camille's Aston Martin appeared in the identifier field. Her registration appeared beneath it. The technical location field identified the lower center interior. The originating employee field carried Kessler's identifier. Morgan leaned closer to the monitor. This was manually created? The clerk checked the audit pane. The advisory record was created manually. Some vehicle information was imported after the identifier was entered. Morgan nodded. Next, the technical standby assignment replaced it. Same vehicle, same lower interior location. Nash's employee number assigned to support. Morgan glanced toward him. This is the assignment you addressed in your statement? Yes. Before you received Pierce's field request? Yes. Kessler shifted his chair an inch. The assignment was preparatory. Morgan did not turn. I'll get to characterization after the records. The next file was Pierce's original field documentation. Then his later supplement. Morgan enlarged one paragraph. Pierce had written that Camille's conduct during roadside contact contributed to his decision to pursue additional verification and technical attention. Morgan read it once. Next, Kessler's supervisory clarification appeared. Technical personnel, it said, had been present solely to assist with conditions independently identified by the originating officer. Morgan asked the clerk to leave that sentence highlighted. Then Nash's statement opened beside it. He had been assigned Camille's vehicle and the lower center location before Pierce requested his assistance. He could not certify that his involvement began because of a condition Pierce first identified. 2 documents now occupied the screen. Morgan placed her pen flat beside the yellow folder. Kessler spoke first. They're describing different stages. Morgan turned toward him. Explain the stages. The advisory was readiness. Pierce made the operational assessment. Technical involvement became active after that assessment. Morgan pointed to the standby assignment. Why was Nash assigned a specific vehicle and a specific interior location during readiness? Because the bulletin gave us a technical concern. The bulletin doesn't identify this vehicle. No. So what connected the bulletin to Ms. Carter's Aston Martin? Kessler reached for his memorandum. Morgan put one finger on its top edge. We're still in the source records. He released it. Camille kept her document folder closed. For days, she had been asked to respond to words after other people had already chosen them. Verification, retention, behavior, precaution, technical concern. Morgan was doing something simpler. Order first, meaning second. The clerk opened the advisory's preserved metadata. A column displayed field origin, vehicle identifier, manual entry, technical location, manual entry, originating employee, Kessler. Source reference, regional bulletin. Morgan studied the 4 lines. What record documents the individualized reason for entering this particular vehicle? Kessler folded his hands. The roadside matter was developing. Morgan looked at Pierce's report. This entry comes later in the sequence. Documentation can follow observations. Yes. She moved the cursor to Pierce's supplement, but his supplement says his roadside observations contributed to technical attention. Nash's assignment already existed. Kessler's jaw moved once. That doesn't mean the technical assignment caused the roadside decision. Morgan nodded. I haven't said it did. She clicked into a blank review field. The issue is narrower. The records currently do not explain the individualized basis for creating the vehicle-specific technical advisory when it was created. No one answered. The clerk's laptop fan increased for several seconds. Morgan typed. Kessler finally pulled his memorandum back toward himself. There was no search authorization in that advisory. Noted. No enforcement action was triggered by the standby assignment. Also noted. It was a planning tool. Morgan stopped typing. A planning tool for which vehicle? Kessler looked at the monitor. Camille's registration remained there. Morgan continued. The review did not determine why the Aston Martin had been selected. It did something more limited and harder to argue with. It established what the existing records could not support. The regional bulletin could explain general awareness. It could not explain Camille-specific fields. Pierce's roadside account could explain what he claimed to observe after contact. It could not explain a technical assignment that already existed. Kessler's clarification could describe his preferred division of responsibility. It could not make Nash's earlier assignment later. Morgan asked for the rear plate record. Camille opened her folder for the first time. The plate discrepancy had been the reason presented to her at the roadside. Later paperwork had treated it as the practical beginning of the matter. Morgan placed that entry in the sequence. Then she moved it downward. The vehicle-specific technical advisory remained above it. So did Nash's standby assignment. Kessler leaned back. The plate issue still justified the field verification. Morgan did not remove it. I'm not evaluating that question yet. She saved the comparison. A new header appeared. Origin sequence comparison. Unresolved individualized basis. Below it, Morgan selected executive disposition as the next review level. Kessler still controlled whether the Vesper module left Fairwick custody that day, but his memorandum was no longer the first document in the file. On the screen, the first record tied specifically to Camille's car came before the event Fairwick had been calling the beginning. The new custody field no longer carried Kessler's name. Camille saw it on Leah Morgan's monitor before anyone explained it. Custodial authority. State preservation hold. Kessler stood behind the empty chair across from Morgan's desk. He had brought the same yellow folder from the previous review and a printed section of Fairwick's evidence policy marked with 2 blue tabs. "The city is still the seizing agency," he said. "Our retention rules require continuity under local control." Morgan held out her hand. Kessler gave her the policy. She read the marked paragraph, turned the page, then looked back at him. "This governs ordinary interdepartmental transfer. It governs custody. Does it address a preservation directive from an outside reviewing authority?" Kessler opened his mouth, then took the policy back and found the second tab. Camille watched him read. He did not answer from that page either. A secure video window occupied the upper corner of Morgan's monitor. The State Preservation Officer appeared only as a title beneath a gray icon. No face, no ceremony. The directive had been triggered by the executive referral from Morgan's origin sequence review, combined with preserved county material and the conflicting Fairwick records already submitted to the Georgia State Integrity Commission. The order did not declare anyone guilty. It did something more immediate. It removed choices. Fairwick could still physically store the Vesper module for the moment, but nobody involved in the underlying matter could authorize testing, copying, release, destruction, reclassification, or transfer without outside approval. Morgan clicked the acknowledgement field. A second notice appeared. Local edit privileges. Suspended preservation. Scope active. Kessler lowered himself into the chair. For which personnel? Morgan opened the attachment. Pierce's incident record privileges were restricted to read-only access. Nash's evidence system credentials were disabled pending review of unauthorized technical access. Kessler's supervisory modification rights were suspended for records connected to Camille's stop, the technical advisory system, and related vehicle holds. Then Morgan scrolled farther. Randall Voss's finance administration credentials had been placed under emergency restriction. Camille's fingers stopped on the edge of her folder. Voss had never touched the roadside evidence bag. He had never stood beside the yellow stripe. His authority lived in another building, behind another login. Yet his access was inside the preservation scope. Kessler noticed the same line. "Finance administration is outside my chain." The state officer answered through the speaker. "The preservation scope follows systems, not reporting lines." Morgan looked toward Camille. "You asked yesterday for written identification of who could alter, retain, or release records going forward." "Yes." Morgan rotated a printed receipt toward her. The document listed the systems now mirrored outside Fairwick: dispatch entries, technical advisories, evidence access history, vehicle holds, municipal financial risk notices, and supervisory revisions. Each source carried a preservation time and a verification mark. Camille read the page without touching it. "Does Fairwick retain authority to correct disputed entries?" "Corrections can be proposed," Morgan said. "Original versions remain preserved." "And closure?" "Not locally." That answer was shorter than any explanation Kessler had given her since Easton Parkway. Across the desk, Kessler folded the evidence policy along its existing crease. The city still employed him. He still had his badge. But the badge no longer gave him the ability to change the records being used to review his decisions. Nash received his notice in the evidence office. His access card opened the exterior door and failed at the controlled property room. Carol Denton, standing behind the glass partition, looked at the reader and then at his credential. She did not press an override. "I can't clear it." Nash checked the notice on his phone. He read the first paragraph, then the second. "Who can?" "State authorization." He put the credential back in his wallet. Pierce learned through his report terminal. The edit button beside his supplemental narrative had disappeared. He could view the document. He could request an amendment. He could no longer replace the language already preserved. He sat with one hand on the mouse until the screen dimmed. Voss's restriction reached farther. The state preservation pull included vehicle-related financial alerts created through his administrative environment. The first export was broader than Camille's case because the same alert categories had been used repeatedly. Ownership inconsistency, financial verification concern, vehicle class discrepancy, technical modification concern. The phrases looked neutral in isolation. The first sampling placed them beside outcomes. Some drivers had been cleared at roadside. Others had been routed into holds, financial review, or extended evidence retention. The state analyst did not announce a conclusion. The analysts sorted the records by treatment, professional documentation, vehicle value, and available demographic information. Patterns began to survive the sorting. Black business owners and professionals appeared repeatedly in the group that received added ownership or financial scrutiny after presenting valid registration information. Comparable drivers in the cleared group often had the same ordinary paperwork available at first contact. Camille read only the portion released to the parties. She did not smile. A table could expose a difference in treatment. It could not return the days already spent arguing with descriptions that had been entered before anyone asked whether they were accurate. Morgan returned to the Vesper module. The state order doesn't authorize immediate release today. Camille nodded once. Who decides now? The Commission's Preservation Council, after an independent evidence review. Kessler looked toward Morgan. You're transferring a Fairwick property decision to the state based on an unresolved administrative question. Morgan placed his local policy beside the state directive. No, the unresolved question is why the transfer is necessary. She signed the disposition. The printer produced copies for Camille, Kessler, and the records office. Outside Morgan's office, a Fairwick administrator began a separate export of historical vehicle holds. Closed files appeared one after another on the transfer queue. When the State Mirror accepted them, Fairwick's local status did not change. A second status appeared beneath it. Under external review, the old cases were no longer finished, simply because Fairwick had once marked them closed. 4 months after Easton Parkway, Carol Denton handed Camille a clipboard and pointed through the glass doors toward the graphite Aston Martin. Condition check before release. The car sat beneath white service lights inside the Fairwick Vehicle Evidence Center. No transfer notice covered the windshield now. No temporary hold card hung from the mirror. The driver's door was closed. Camille took the clipboard. Carol walked beside her while a ceiling camera recorded the release inspection. They compared the wheels, glass, paint, and interior with the photographs taken the day the car entered custody. At the passenger side rear quarter, Carol touched a small mark with the capped end of her pen. Documented on intake. Camille checked the photograph clipped beneath the condition sheet. Yes. Carol marked the box. Neither woman hurried. The release procedure had changed. A disputed vehicle could no longer leave or remain in Fairwick custody on the approval of the same command chain that initiated the hold. A second reviewer outside that chain had already signed the release electronically. Every amendment to the custody record now remained visible beside the original entry. Carol turned the page. One more item. The center console trim had been reinstalled. Camille sat behind the wheel and ran one finger beneath the display. The controls worked. The upholstery was clean. The lower panel sat where it belonged. A narrow seam remained along the edge where the trim had been opened. Carol leaned through the doorway. We can request replacement trim. Camille kept her finger on the line for another second. No. You're sure? Yes. Oh. Carol checked another box. The Vesper module was not inside the car. An independent state evidence team had completed its examination and transferred the module under signed receipt to the Georgia Office of Public Accountability. Fairwick no longer controlled it. The final technical report confirmed the part that mattered. Vesper had not contained a secret criminal ledger. It had not named guilty people. It had not produced confessions. The folders presented through separate access contexts had been decoy datasets. What happened after those folders appeared was real. Colin Nash had copied material through an unauthorized private device. Paul Kessler had changed access permissions and revised reporting after his own examination. Nolan Pierce had used temporary credentials and preserved internal messages once he believed the others intended to place responsibility on him. Those actions had generated ordinary records. Login history, version history, device connections, massage, signed reports. The final commission finding placed those records beside the Easton Parkway chronology. Its language was restrained. The initial traffic explanation had not supported the technical search that followed. Camille's refusal of consent had later been recorded as cooperation. The municipal alert had been created after the investigative action it was later used to justify. Technical access occurred outside the approved evidence process. Subsequent changes to reports and permissions were inconsistent with preservation requirements. Fairwick published the finding. No headline was required. The document used names, dates, actions, and responsible departments. That was enough. Pierce's employment ended after his disciplinary review. The state certification process continued separately. When it concluded, his law enforcement certification was revoked. The discrepancies in his reports, his unauthorized credentials, and his preserved internal communications were referred for review of possible criminal violations. The referral was not a conviction. It did mean he could no longer put on a badge in another Georgia department and begin again with an empty personnel file. Kessler lost command authority before his disciplinary case finished. His final appeal did not restore it. Fairwick dismissed him after reviewers compared his revised reports, permission changes, and recorded instructions with records created before those revisions existed. The same administrative precision he had used to protect the stop made the sequence difficult to explain away. Nash lost access to the evidence system first, then his investigative credentials. The private copy of Vesper data, the non-standard reader, and the differences between his original technical notes and his later report remained in the file after his employment ended. He could dispute motive. He could not remove the timestamps. Randall Voss never regained his administrative credentials. The state financial inquiry around his office remained active. So did review of the restricted vehicle information, municipal alert path, and vendor records tied to his administrative environment. His attorneys challenged parts of the preservation order. The originals stayed outside Fairwick. Peter Lang cooperated after the hearing. His cooperation became part of the record. So did the records showing that he had distributed selected information between people who were already protecting themselves from one another. A professional licensing board revoked his authority to perform municipal audit work. Claire Benson returned to full duty with Carson County. Captain Monica Reyes later incorporated the Easton Parkway evidence sequence into county training. The instruction was simple. When two agencies may later disagree about what happened, preserve the original medium before interpretation becomes policy. The wider vehicle audit took longer. Reviewers compared Fairwick's historical luxury vehicle holds with registrations, release times, technical review requests, financial alerts, and final dispositions. The pattern survived the first sample. Then the larger one. Black professionals and business owners appeared disproportionately among drivers, escalated from ordinary roadside verification into ownership, financial or technical investigations, even when valid documentation had already been presented. Comparable drivers were more often cleared without those additional steps. Several cars had remained in custody long enough to accumulate administrative costs. Some later entered disposal or auction processes. The state did not declare every old case identical. It ordered them reopened. Owners received notices. Some records were corrected. Documented fees produced by improper holds were refunded in qualifying cases. Other owners entered individual claims processes where larger losses required separate proof. Camille received her own correction packet through Elaine Porter. The title flag was removed. The insurance-related fraud review was withdrawn. The municipal financial integrity entry was marked unsupported. The vehicle hold was formally vacated. Storage and administrative charges associated with Fairwick's seizure were canceled. A reimbursement check covered documented transportation and filing costs that the review had approved. Elaine placed the final letter on the conference table. Camille read the first page, then the second. Near the bottom, under the commission reference, was one sentence she had not seen in any earlier version. The record does not support a finding that Dr. Foster consented to the vehicle search. She closed the packet. The sentence did not return the afternoon appointment she had canceled. It did not return the weeks without the car. It did not remove the articles that had described a black woman in an expensive Aston Martin as unwilling to explain where her money came from. It did not refund privacy. But the false version no longer occupied the official space by itself. Fairwick changed its systems before the historical review finished. Patrol media was mirrored outside local control. Finance employees could not create police-facing alerts without an independently visible audit entry. Vehicle holds required outside secondary approval. Edited reports retained permanent version histories. The evidence center was removed from finance administration. Historical seizure review became an external process rather than an internal Fairwick project. The following Saturday, Camille drove the Aston Martin east. Storefront glass moved across the graphite hood. The engine stayed low through the commercial district. The center display sat clean in the dash. Below it, the narrow seam remained. She reached the same stretch of Easton Parkway. The faded yellow maintenance stripe appeared beside the shoulder. Months earlier, Pierce had told her exactly where to stand on it. Camille kept both hands on the wheel. The Aston Martin passed the stripe at road speed. The line stayed on the pavement. This time, it had no authority over her. This is a fictional story.